Is Low Sontag with D10 to D11s, the Dorothy Parker Reads Here. And today I am talking to Nancy. She will be one of our readers on May 17th, and I am so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks so much.
Yeah, so I'm gonna kind of just get into like a juicy kind of a question. Not really even juicy, but especially in this time, like what inspires you to write? And would you call yourself a feminist writer?
Aha. Okay. What inspires me to write? Um, what really inspires me to write or to work on a story that's going to become something, right? Not just journal or whatever, is really a good story. If I get inspired by hearing something about a person or a condition or kind of like a what if question. And I feel like it has an important answer, or it's something that people don't know or understand. I feel like if I can tell it in a story, I will make people pay attention to things that they might not normally have done, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
My first two books were immigrant stories,
Hmm.
people who came here from elsewhere, and I felt like when my first book, From the Abuelas Window, kind of got inspired, my goal was write a story that helps young adults understand why friends and neighbors and classmates, families come here from a different country. Like,
Hmm.
what are they leaving?
Hmm.
Right. And so that was what inspired that story. I felt like it was really important. I guess that might be an educational goal.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
And then the second one came right after that one was published. And again, it was a part of history that most people didn't know anything about. I mean, it was World War II. It was not a Holocaust story necessarily. It was a anti-Soviet invasion of the Baltics
Hmm.
story, right? And it was kind of a flipped, we think, of course, that Hitler was a bad guy, and of course he is. But in this country, because Stalin and Russia were our allies, we don't talk about their atrocities. So
Hmm.
I wanted that to be available for people to know, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And then, long answer, my other two stories just came. Only the Women Are Burning, which I think is one of the stories that we're going to mostly talk about. I just had this imagery and this idea of women walking through their lives and just bursting into flame as they went through their normal routine. And it just kind of came to me when I was writing in my journal. And I did a really deep dive into why would that happen?
Hmm.
Why would it only be women that it happened to? And that was more kind of like an internal perspective, like look internally at one of the answers to those questions might be. But
Hmm.
then the flip side of that, which is the science fiction part of it, is, well, how could it really happen, like in the physical elements of the world, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And it was kind of like this the science and what I call the pseudoscience, because it's not all hard science in that story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and then a lot of the stories in my story collection are outtakes from things that I was working on and experimenting with for Only the Women Are Burning. I kind of took them out of a file of outtakes, and many of them were from there, but some others were written elsewhere. But they were all inspired primarily by stories I observed in real life that contained conflict
Hmm.
or cognitive dissonance, and I was just trying to work out who are these people and why are they doing certain things. So yeah.
Well, I think the thing is just really, I mean, I kind of in my, I'm going to put it on you anyway. I look at the woman in Burning as kind of like almost like a feminist tell. I don't know if you were like thinking about that when you did that, but especially now, especially, you said that book came out in 2020, so it was kind of during the COVID period. And this is a time that people were kind of like trapped in their in their homes. And I'm just kind of like getting to the book. Only women are burning isn't settled. It's accusatory. Like who exactly in this book who is doing the burning? I mean, is this story about systems, about intimate relationships? Is it about the ways women are taught to participate in their own erasure? I mean, it's like, you're saying you're observing things, you're observing conflict. Is it like personal conflict? Is it institutional conflict? Like what were the things that were going through your head? Okay, we only have 30 minutes, but what were the things that were going through your head when you're kind of like putting this book out? And was the book finished before COVID, or was it like finished after COVID? Like when as you were writing it, was it starting? Because I remember like February 2019 and things were closing up and I was going to DC and I was like, oh, I'll come back later. And
Yeah.
I never did.
Yeah, no, it took me a really long time to write Only the Women Are Burning. There were actually 5 full drafts of that novel. And the protagonist took on different forms and shapes and characterizations until I finally, kind of finished it. Probably finished it mostly in long before COVID hit, right?
Okay.
Um, so the short answer is I think the story speculates on how women can be complicit in their own victimhood,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sometimes like unwittingly,
Mm-hmm.
and then sometimes through conscious choice, even though they really should know better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of drives everything, like as an underneath layer of what this book is really about. And then you can take that and you can apply that to systems, you can apply that to intimate relationships,
Mm-hmm.
right? How are women taught, like, in your question, how are women taught to get by in the world?
Mm-hmm.
And what do we do? And what are the choices that we make? Because my big thing is, what are the expectations that we have as women as we grow up from girlhood to womanhood? And how much of the choices that we make are because of the way the system puts us in a little, this is what you're supposed to do, right? And and then, so what if you don't? What if you don't do what you are supposed to do? um it can go a lot of different places.
No, I mean, I think
Right.
that's the thing that's really interesting. And I think that especially now in the period that we're in, and you kind of go, oh, we had choices and we're deciding to do these certain things, but in some ways you see not necessarily. I mean, we do. Well, that's why I'm kind of like another question is like, do you see this as an indictment or a mirror? Like, who do you think would be the most uncomfortable looking into it? Like in regards to like only women paying. Like, I mean, that's kind of a big, vague question, but I've always, I don't know. As I went to I'm from California. So when I went to the middle of the country, my husband's from the Midwest. He's from Wisconsin. I was very shocked at the choices that people don't actually have. Um,
Yes.
and it seemed like they had a choice, but it also seemed like the men in their lives could kill them. And now we see that as a actual not a fear, but it's something that actually happens. So you think it's like do you think it's a mirror, or do you think that it's an indictment? Like, why is this happening?
um yeah, that's philosophically, we can get really deep into that one. um it probably, I like the word mirror in this context,
Okay.
because what I hoped was that women would see themselves somewhere in this book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And whether it was in Cassandra, who is the primary, right, main character, the protagonist, or in the women who she had associations with, or even the women who she didn't have associations with, who this happened to, who she became curious to find out about who they were
Mm-hmm.
and what would have been in their lives to have had this have happened to them, right? And you just mentioned something interesting, like the men don't have to don't only have to kill you. There are some very, very subtle other ways that women get chipped away at in their role or in their, I'll say the word patriarchy, right? It's like,
Yeah.
this is where you are as a woman in relation to the predominant force, which is the male society.
Hmm.
And, as I'm talking to you, I'm conjuring that image from, this is crazy, um, uh, Project Hail Mary, where Rocky, the alien, is inside this ball and he can't
Yeah.
get out because he'll die,
Yeah.
right? It's like we get put in these little balls, and if you dare deviate and try to come outside of that ball, if you look at the really, really early feminist literature, like The Awakening by Kate Chopin,
Yeah.
they can't survive back there.
Yes.
Right? I mean, she, what the ending of that book is. But in today's world, yes, we can survive. But but you really are, you're cracking open something to get to the place where you can keep yourself intact.
Hmm.
But then when you do that, what happens is you have to go through the healing of letting go of everything that defined you prior,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And that's very scary for some people. And a lot,
Yeah.
that might be the self-imposed
Hmm.
imprisonment, so to speak, right?
Yes.
And then, what we also do is we do all these what we call self-care things
Hmm.
while we're in those psychic places. But we stay within those psychic places and we just do, little things to try to kind of soothe ourselves.
Yes.
But if you actually break out of it, then what you try to do is not hurt anybody while you are redefining or getting yourself away from only fulfilling expectations.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
No, no, it does make sense, but it's very challenging because I mean it's going to kind of go into the next question. Your work does not appear to sentimentalize women's suffering, which is pretty radical. Were you actively resisting the expectation that women's pain be made palatable or even beautiful for readers? I mean, I think about consumption and how, yeah, it's horrible, but she's so skinny, and you don't do that. So, is that what you were thinking about?
I didn't want to soft serve
Yes.
anything. I wanted, I say sometimes there's a little bit of a magic realism kind of element to this, but
Yes.
the realism for me was very, very important.
Yes.
And that's the realism, is this hurts. And there's no two ways about it. It's going to hurt.
Yeah.
Right. And then what do you do? Because life can be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I'm listening to the book Theo of Golden right now.
Hmm.
Have
Hmm.
you Do you know that book?
No. No.
And he does all of, he gets all these people to tell him all of their stories of what they suffered with in their lives. And he's kind of doing that. There's no mincing around this. This was painful. And you are a survivor of this. And what are you going to do now? You know? But with this, with the women are burning, there is this self-help pathway that some of them had collectively embraced that turned out to actually be the thing that hurt them in the long run. So the
No,
path,
no, no, that's exactly the point. It's like you're trying to, yeah, what you're trying to do to help yourself ends up hurting you. And
right.
it's like this very weird trap that you're in. And it's very interesting how we're talking about this, and especially in the period that we're in.
Oh my
It's kind of
God.
like it's almost like
Yes.
it used to be that way. I was listening to Susan Sontag, and she's like, this is in the 1970s, and she's like, oh, by then, in about 20 years, we'll all make the same amount of money, and these are all little petty things. But the thing is that it was very revolutionary. But now I'm like, if she were alive and she saw what's happening right now, you know what I mean? It's
Oh,
very,
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah,
could you imagine if Ruth Bader Ginsburg was alive right now and no longer on the Supreme Court? I mean, what would she
exactly,
with
exactly. I mean,
all yes, with everything that was pushed, was pushed forward and pushed through on our behalf, and now it's just pulling back, pulling back, pulling back. I was I was at a party the other day and some guy read the article in the New York Times about how trad wives is coming back.
hmm
And he doesn't have any children. He is married. He doesn't have any children. He's like an older guy. And he was actually almost gleeful about the wonderful idea that that is actually going to happen. And I got to tell you, I let him have it.
Well, no, a lot of these. I was talking to my friend Nicole, and she's an artist in Los Angeles, and we were like saying they seem really happy actually. They don't, even they seem very, very, very happy about what is happening right now. Um, but to go back to the questions, there's a quiet brutality in how like your characters navigate domestic and emotional space, and how
Mm.
much of that comes from observing every day versus intentionally heightening it, because the violence like isn't spectacular, like you're like saying. It's not like they have to kill you. It's like it's structural, it's institutional. I mean, it's you know and I keep wanting to say this, but I kind of want to like save it. This feels like, is this New Jersey? Is this suburban New Jersey, or is this suburban America? I've always felt like this is an interesting place to watch and to observe, just because I think of how much more money men make than women here, and how dependent you often are on your spouse, even if you have a degree from Harvard, even if you're, a very educated woman. I have so many friends here, specifically in like suburban New Jersey, who almost seem trapped. So what do you have
Ah,
to say about that? And it doesn't sound, and it sounds horrible to say, because it's like, oh, your life is so nice. You have such a nice house. You have nice things. So you should be happy.
it's the bird in the gilded cage.
Yeah.
Yeah, Um, yeah, well, I'm just trying to think of how do I answer the question? How do I answer this very complex question? Um, it is, I mean, I did write it because I'm from New Jersey. I've always lived here. I've always been an Essex County girl, right? I grew up in Bloomfield. I lived for 30 years in Montclair, and now I'm right over the border and I'm having withdrawal, right?
Yeah.
But it very much is based on suburban life in New Jersey. I mean, there's a train, right? And it goes to New York. It's very geographically, very much. Hillston, the fictional town, is
Mm-hmm.
based on my experiences.
Mm-hmm.
In a town like Montclair, which is suburban, but it's got a different level of sophistication than if you go to the further outer suburbs, right?
Yes.
But it is very expensive to live here. Oh, so yeah. So the whole idea is that they're not the women are not necessarily trapped,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
I kind of feel like usually if you are feeling trapped, I mean, if you are trapped really, you're not
Yes.
necessarily cognizant of the fact that you are trapped,
Okay.
right? And you just do your comfortable little life within your comfortable little pattern,
Mm-hmm.
right? And most of the times you just cope within the pattern, what is available for you, right? And I think I
Mm-hmm.
kind of I kind of hit on that with the self-care, exercise, yoga, meditation, support groups, therapy. You change jobs, you write, you join a writing group, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of what I wrote about in here, and I mentioned earlier that when I see conflicts or I see people misbehaving or I see what people put up with so that they can preserve where they are in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Those are like the little, we can call them microaggressions, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And people say hurtful things to each other,
Mm-hmm.
or they neglect each other, or they make assumptions about each other, right? Even like let's say in an intimate relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Women have certain expectations of what an intimate relationship really means. And then, and within a marriage, very often, or at least in some people's experiences who I could not mention by name, um, the expectation of the partner or the spouse is very different in terms of the level of intimacy. Not only sexual intimacy, but intimacy in how you're going about your life together. And there's this whole idea. I'm trying to remember the philosophy, but the distance between the ideal that we are raised with and the actual real that is in our world, we
Mm-hmm.
have to live within that space in between those two things. And very often it just becomes kind of impossible to do that. Um, I mean, I also think sometimes about life in, like the way our lives are, where, we have all these concentric circles around ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we are in the middle of our own concentric circles. And if you are in a life where someone does not acknowledge that you are in the center of your own concentric circles, and you are simply a satellite on theirs in an orbit around theirs, you're being significantly hurt and shortchanged. And you're only acknowledged with a certain percentage of yourself, which is how you serve those others, right? Whether it be a spouse, whether it be a family of origin, right? So, like, narcissistic people don't look at people who are in the center of their own concentric circle, and that they are in orbit around you as much as you are in orbit around them. So that's how you hurt people, because you have expectations that it's going to be all about you, or somebody else might be like, oh, this is all about me. And you're like, oh, no, it isn't, because I'm here too. And that causes conflict. I mean, that caused major conflicts within my family of origin because we just had too many kids, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I won't go too far into that, but you see what I'm saying? It's like people just don't acknowledge. They think you're there for them and they're not there for you. And that causes problems, causes suffering and hurt.
No, it does. And I mean, I think that you're a very fascinating person. And I think that one of the fascinating things about you, and that's one thing that's very interesting and good about like meeting a person through the written word. And that's how we kind of get to know each other. How I know you
Yeah.
is through the written word, through social media. I know a lot of people don't like social media, but because I'm friends with a lot of writers, I get to see who they are. And I think that your restraint is very interesting. And I would like to know all the things that you're very polite. I would like to know all like I would like to get you drunk and have you like let loose. I'm like, no, I know she wants to say something else. It's okay though. It's fine. It'll take time. But I want to know this because of this book. This book to me it seems like a movie that wants to happen. And you did um you adapted this into like a screenplay. Um and like was it harder or easier? Or do you think like if this ever does get made into a movie, like do you think some books you might think like this would be a better movie than it is a book because you could like what do you think about that? Especially I think the setting that I think it's Montclair. I could be wrong.
Yes, it is.
Okay. That needs to be a movie. Was it easier or harder, like doing a screenplay? Was that easier or harder? You're just imagining like who's playing the parts or
Yeah, I would kind of go through these things like who could play Cassandra, right?
hmm
And
hmm
first I thought, oh, Sandra Bullock would be great. Jessica Buckley. Now I would love for Jessica Buckley to play Cassandra.
yeah.
Um, it is hard to adapt your own work to a different form.
hmm
especially a novel that has a lot of interior space. And this is kind of the classic, how do you adapt a novel to for the screen, right? How do you
Yeah.
take the internal space of the character and make sure that it is communicable to the audience on the screen? That part is really hard. The other part of this is too is, if I try to imagine how would we shoot the burning scenes,
Hmm.
right? So, that that part um, is fascinating to me because I'm not a filmmaker and I have no idea how a cinematographer would choose to stage that. I'm sure they could do it, but yeah, it kind of smacks of a horror movie, but it's not a horror story, right?
Yeah.
So I would probably, this screenplay was written, but I got some feedback and I'll probably do some revisions on it before I do anything else with it. But I think back to how Stephen King takes human emotions and exaggerates them into his horror stories, right?
Hmm.
And those get adapted to the screen. But I don't want this to be a horror movie. I want this to be a feminist liberation. This woman recognizes what's happening and I guess, reestablishes her old self,
Hmm.
right? Because she is a stay-at-home mom who has given up a career, and everybody looks at her like she's just a stay-at-home mom. And I just want her to be able to recover her old self and establish, right? So that really would be the theme that I want for the main character, but also, bring in all those other, I, you know, feminist ideas about why is this happening to women,
No, I mean, I think it would be really, really interesting, especially when I think about, I think about that movie Us. It's very, very interesting. I think about certain ways that certain people make horror movies now. And then I also think about Simone Du Bois' Second Sex. And I always kind of sometimes if you I always wondered how that book would be if through the lens of race. And I always wondered what a movie like Us would be through the lens of gender. So I always see things that I go, "Oh, that's cool," and go, "How would you flip that?" And like, and tell those interesting like because I always thought that The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir was a very yeah, I always thought that was a very interesting way of looking at sexism and like the patriarchy. And I always felt like that would be interesting if you flip that. But I think like your book, like you're saying, you're like, it's not a horror movie. I mean, it's not a horror, but it kind of is, but it's a horror because it's real. So it's kind of like you don't have to really
yeah,
imagine. It's like, I mean, it's real, but it is real. It is real. But we're running out of time, but the thing is your background is anthropology, which I think is I can really see that in like your writing where you're kind of like looking at like, evolutionary like biology, you're looking at like just like science, biology, you're looking at history and you're putting it all together and seeing like what are these people trying to say and just like almost like an investigator. It's like
yeah, yeah,
and it's like do it's like how people like normalize like horrible things and your fiction is kind of like documenting these kinds of things but you still are doing fiction. I mean, do you get more because I think a lot of people have a lot of imagination. I meet a lot of who are writers who don't kind of have that background and I think sometimes it might take away but you have that science background. Do you think that that impacts like how you write and even how you teach and how you talk to other people and other writers?
yeah, yeah. I think it does, because what I like to, well, for the hard science, right? I was almost a hard science major in college, and then I switched to anthropology just, like sometime in my second year, because I was more fascinated by people than I was with organic chemistry, let's say, and I was not good with math, right? But I mean, even now, I always want to know what's underneath I don't know how to explain it. Like with the physical science, like when I'm teaching research writing, this is so strange. I always remind my students at NJIT that remember fourth grade when you learned the scientific method, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's a question, a hypothesis, and then you put it into motion, right?
Hmm.
So you can almost say that only the women are burning was, I mean, I didn't think about this at the time, but it's the same thing. Oh, this happened, the women are burning. What could be causing that to happen, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then, then Cassandra goes about like understanding and learning different kinds of things
Hmm.
about all the different converging energies, I will say, which is what I call the cause of this whole thing. And she examines each one in kind. And then, and then the reader finds the solution with her.
Hmm.
So yeah, science and I just love the interface between culture and personality too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, how does culture drive, you know, how we interact with people? That the cultural anthropology part of it is, it's in me all the time. It's just part of me now, right?
No, it feels like it is part of you, and I feel like when you first started your first books, you were kind of more into you were kind of like, okay, I'm kind of researching and showing what this would be like a kind of a literal thing, and then you kind of like saw, okay, how can I make this into more, how you just got deeper and deeper and deeper, but it's still very like you could still see that anthropology part of it. It's just like in a way that is deeper and even more accessible, but also more thoughtful and more like philosophical in this weird way. But I want to before we wrap up, I want to ask you about you're adopting from the Abuelas Window, which you talk a lot about. I don't think you talk about life, and life can be painful. Music, music, it kind of softens and stylizes pain, and you kind of don't necessarily do that. So, what are you interested in preserving, and what are you willing to make a little bit different, like when you move like women's stories or feminist stories into that format?
Wow. um Well, when I originally, yeah, I told you what the original reason for writing the book was this is
Yes.
people come here for a reason. What are they leaving that is dangerous, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And when I decided to adapt it, um, it just had a musicality around it. The original book did because the little girl sang, right?
Hmm.
But I wanted to highlight. This is a hard one. I don't know if when I looked at the question, I didn't have a good satisfactory answer for this one, but I found a Chilean composer, right, who
Yeah,
was
yeah.
working with me to do the music, and he is in Santiago de Chile, right? He's
Hmm.
he's he's from there. He's 29-year-old young man who is incredibly talented. This is his first musical. Um, we wanted to preserve the Chilean culture and music in the telling of the story, right? Um, but the other thing about this story is, yeah, it's abuelas or grandmothers, right? This is a multi-generational story. And what we're trying to show is, yes, there is a sadness in this story because the young girl's father is among the disappeared. The Pinochet dictatorship was a horrendous place and regime under which to live, but there is a resilience, right?
Hmm.
And there is a group of people in a village who are determined to be resilient under the harshest of circumstances. And so the music will deviate through, joyfulness, sadness, fear, more joyfulness, determination, energy, right? Positive energy to affect something, to push back against. Even if you can't solve the whole thing, you can push back against pieces of it.
Hmm.
right? Which is a message for today. And it's the women who are the heroines in this story, right? They're saving the men, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's so important today because of
It
what's
definitely
going
is.
on in our country. It's like, what can we do against what is happening? So there's this little, well, here's a lifeline of, here's a simple story of people who ask those same questions. And this is what they took on, right? This is the action that they pulled together to do. And don't we want to be that brave, right?
Mm.
And of course we do, even if we're terrified, right?
No, definitely. And I think it's very interesting that you brought up in this conversation, you brought up three authoritarians. But you have a very political. No, but I also, I have a real issue with authoritarians also, because some people are kind of like, well, if the authoritarian is so-called left, I'm like, dude, they're still trying to kill you. I mean, they're still trying to harm you. And I am not a subscriber of, I call it disaster patriarchy, which some people are very into.
Authoritarians are, it's almost like they're the ultimate in patriarchy,
Yes,
right? And it's just whatever you think your ideology is, to try to control that way is just flat out wrong. It's just wrong.
exactly.
And that's the evolutionary change that I think the human race needs to recognize and no longer let happen. And we haven't succeeded yet, but we're going to.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much, Nancy. This was a wonderful chat.
Great. All right. Thank you so much.